As the memory of men is frail and weak, it would be impossible to remember everything accurately with regard to all our great and important affairs unless we avail ourselves of writing to assist us in our purposes. At the time when the Spaniards first landed in this country of Peru, and when they arrived at the city of Cajamarca, which is about 190 leagues from here, my father, Manco Inca, was residing in the city of Cusco. There he governed with all the powers that had been bestowed upon him by his father, Huayna Capac. He first learned of the Spaniards' arrival from certain messengers who had been sent there from one of his brothers by the name of Atahualpa, who was older but a bastard, and by some Indians from the lowlands called Tayanas, who live on the coast of the South Sea, 15 or 20 leagues from Cajamarca. They reported having observed that certain people had arrived in their land, people who were very different to us in custom and dress, and that they appeared to be viracochas. This is the name that we used to apply to the creator of all things. They named the people as such because they differed much from us in clothing and appearance, and because they rode very large animals with silver feet, by which they meant the glittering horseshoes. Another reason for calling them so was that the Indians saw them alone, talking to white cloths, as a person who would speak to another, which is how the Indians perceived the reading of books and letters. Moreover, they called them viracochas because of the stately appearance of their persons, and because each was so different from the other, some having black beards and others red ones, and finally because they saw them eat out of silver dishes and using iapas, which is the word we use for thunder, and by which they meant their guns, for they thought that the thunder they made came from the sky. This video is sponsored by Magellan TV, the documentary streaming service. Here at Voices of the Past, we give you the raw source without commentary. And a great place to go if you want to dive in deeper to some of these places and time periods is Magellan TV. They are huge supporters of history content on YouTube, me and my brother especially. So, if this video gives you a taste of South America, our recommendation this week is Brazil from Above, which will dive you right into beautiful Amazonian landscapes. A great antidote to 2021 claustrophobia. And there really isn't a better time to try out the more than 3,000 documentaries Magellan has available. And you can now take advantage of an exclusive offer, 30% off an annual membership. This gives you an entire year for less than $3.50 a month, even if you've joined Magellan before and lapsed. You can simply click on the link in the description to claim your discounted membership today. Thanks. Two of these viracochas were brought to my uncle Atahualpa by some men from the Yunca people. At the time, Atahualpa was staying at Cajamarca, where he received them very well. However, when he offered the customary drink in a golden cup to one of them, the Spaniard poured it out with his own hands, which offended my uncle very much. After that, those two Spaniards showed my uncle a letter or a book, explaining to him that this was the book of God and of the king. My uncle, still offended by the wasting of the chica, which is how we call our drink, took the letter, or whatever it was, and threw it down, saying, "What is this supposed to be that you gave me here? Be gone." Thereupon the Spaniards returned to their companions and related to them what they had seen and what had happened during their dealings with my uncle, Atahualpa. Many days later, my uncle Atahualpa was engaged in war and altercations with one of his brothers, Manco Inca, over the question of who was the rightful king of this land. In any case, while these two brothers, sons of different mothers, were caught up in these said altercations, it was reported that 40 or 50 Spaniards had arrived at Cajamarca, the town mentioned above, on their well-equipped horses. My uncle Atahualpa learned of this while he was celebrating a certain festival, and immediately set out with his entourage. However, he brought no weapons for battle or harnesses for defence, only tomes, which is how we call our knives, and lassos for the purpose of hunting this new kind of llama, which is how we called our livestock, and also their horses, since we had never seen any before. Not concerned about the few people who had come or interested in who they were, they brought only the tomes and knives for skinning and quartering the animals. When my uncle was approaching Cajamarca with all of his people, the Spaniards met them at the springs of Conoc, 1.5 leagues from Cajamarca. Having arrived there, he asked them why they had come, and they answered that they had come on orders of the Viracocha in order to tell him how to get to know him. After having heard what they had to say, my uncle attended to them and calmly offered one of them a drink in the manner I have already described above, in order to see if these people too would waste the drink. And indeed, it happened just like before. Having seen how little they minded his things, my uncle said, "If you disrespect me, I will also disrespect you." He got up angrily and raised a cry as though he wanted to kill the Spaniards. However, the Spaniards were on the lookout and took possession of the 4 gates of the plaza where they were, which was enclosed on all its sides. The Indians were thus penned up like sheep in this enclosed plaza, unable to move because there were so many of them. After they had taken everything from him, they apprehended him, and because the Indians uttered loud cries, they started killing them with the horses, the swords or guns, like one kills sheep, without anyone being able to resist them. Of more than 10,000, not even 200 escaped. When all were dead, they took my uncle to a jail, where they kept him all night, stark naked and his neck in shackles. The next day in the morning, they gave him his clothes and asked, "Are you the king of this country?" He answered that he was, and they said, "There is none other beside you, for we know that there is another one called Manco Inca. Where is he?" My uncle answered, "In Cusco." They asked, "And where is that?" "Cusco." Meanwhile, while the Spaniards were still deliberating whether or not to send the messenger, the Talana people on the coast found out about the whole thing, and because they respected my father a great deal and acknowledged him as their king, decided to bring the news themselves to my father, without informing the Spaniards. Thus they left for Cusco, and upon their arrival addressed my father with these words, "Sapa Inca," which means "you, our sole lord. We have come to tell you that a new sort of people have arrived in your land, a race that has never been heard of or seen before by our nations, and that, without doubt, appears to be that of the Viracochas. They have arrived in Cajamarca where your brother is. He has told them in no uncertain terms that he is the lord and king of this country. This has caused us, as your vassals, great grief." When my father heard this, he was beside himself and said, "How dare these people intrude into my country without my authorization and permission? Who are these people, and what are their ways?" The messengers answered, "Lord, these people cannot but be Viracochas, for they claim to have come by the wind. They are bearded people, very beautiful and white. They eat out of silver plates. Even their sheep who carry them are large and wear silver shoes. Finally, they are people whose only visible parts are their hands and their face. The clothes that they wear are even better than yours, for they contain gold and silver." My father, who was the type of man who wanted to know things for certain, turned to threatening the messengers, saying, "You'd better be sure that you haven't lied to me in these things that you report, for you know very well how my ancestors and myself deal with liars. If you are so eager to testify to the arrival of these people, why don't you go and bring one of them to me, so I can see them and thereby be persuaded?" Once they had arrived in Cusco, they were introduced to my father, who received them very respectfully and supplied them with shelter and everything they needed. The next day he invited them to his residence and hosted a great celebration with many people and much display of gold and silver dishes. Among them, innumerable pitchers, cups, bowls and pots from the same material. When the Spaniards caught a glimpse of so much gold and silver, they told him to let them have some of it, so that they could show it to the Marquis and his companions in order to demonstrate to them the greatness of his power. My father agreed and gave them many pitchers, golden cups and other regalia and precious pieces for themselves, and some for their companions. When the 2 Spaniards arrived at the place where the Marquis Don Francisco Pizarro was staying with the messengers and the news that my father had sent, the Marquis, whom we used to call Macho Capitu, was assured that my father was the true king of the entire land, the one who was respected, feared and recognized as such by all, while Atahualpa, his older brother, ruled the land as a tyrant. The Marquis was extremely delighted, either because he had good news from my father of how high a person he was, or because of the exquisitely beautiful and generous gift that my father had sent. But he was upset by the news that my father's brother vexed and molested him so much without any reason, and that he had usurped his kingdom in defiance of all laws. However, as it turned out later, Atahualpa did not escape the punishment that he deserved. When my uncle Atahualpa saw that my father had sent messengers and so much gold and silver to the Spaniards, he was upset. Not only was it not lost on him how quickly my father had aligned himself with them and they recognized him as the legitimate king and lord, but also he thought that this alliance would be his doom. As he was harbouring the suspicion and fear of being cornered, he decided to summon all of his people and captains who were with him in order to apprise them of the sad condition in which he found himself. These people who have entered our lands hold notions contrary to our own and have aligned themselves with my brother Manco Inca and seem to live in great harmony with him. If you are in agreement, we will dash their heads in and kill them. For I believe that, although we have but a few brave men, we can again rule this land the way we used to. The men and captains who had heard the reasoning of my uncle agreed and cried in unison, "Hu Sapai Inca," which means, "You have spoken truly, Lord. It's time to kill these Spaniards, for what can they do against us? All of them together wouldn't even make a lunch for us." However, soon after they determined the day and hour on which they wanted to carry out their plot, the Marquis, I don't know how, found out about it. Thus the Marquis had them for lunch before they could have him, because he now knew about the conspiracy against the Spaniards. He positioned his spies everywhere and ordered highest alert. Without delay, he had my uncle Atahualpa brought out of prison, into the open, and, without any resistance, garroted him on a pole in the middle of the square. And as soon as this was done, he set out to depart in order to see my father. But no matter how quickly he acted, the Indians still came down upon him like a rainstorm. For an Indian by the name of Chalcochima, Atahualpa's general, and another by the name of Quizquis, his companion, both of whom were very brave and powerful, had gathered a great multitude of people to avenge the death of their lord. When my father had news about the distress in which they found themselves, he decided to raise men who would rush to their aid. Thus he departed from Cusco with more than 100,000 people and came to meet the Marquis, who had already captured Chalcochima. The Marquis was very happy to see my father, who had travelled with his golden and crystal litters and his royal crown. The Marquis turned over Chalcochima to my father with the following words: "Look, here, Manco Inca, here I brought you your archenemy in chains. Decide for yourself what you want to do with him." When my father saw him, he ordered that he be burnt immediately before everyone's eyes, so that this news would reach his ally Quizquis, and thus be a punishment for the former and an example for the latter. After the punishment against so bad an Indian as he was had been executed, they went together to Cusco. My father was later satisfied to learn of the death of the traitor Quizquis, and called upon all his people to pay a tribute for the Spaniards' sustenance. While the tribute was being collected, my father presented them with a great amount of treasure that had been given to him by his ancestors. The governor and his men received them most happily and gratefully. When the Spaniards saw themselves so enriched, they wanted to return to their home country, but my father, who considered them to be newcomers to his country, did not want to let them go, but told them that he still wanted the pleasure of their company and wanted to keep them in the country a little while longer so that they could inform their own country adequately about his. Thus they spent many days in Cusco in my father's company and enjoyed themselves thoroughly. But greed, so powerful in all men, overcame them so completely that they were seduced by the devil, always a friend of all evil and enemy of virtue, to conspire and plot in secrecy how and by what means they would torment my father and extort a greater amount of silver and gold than what they had already extorted from him. When my unsuspecting father, a few days after this plot had been forged, was serenely staying in his house, more than 100 Spaniards came with treacherous intentions under the pretext of paying him a visit. "We have found out, Manco Inca, that you are planning to rise up against us just like your brother Atahualpa in order to destroy us. Be informed, however, that the governor has ordered us to arrest you and put you in chains, so that you are unable to harm us." When my father saw them so determined, he was very upset and exclaimed, "What have I done to you that you should treat me in this manner and chain me like a dog? Is this how you reciprocate the favours I have done you by guiding you through my land and making you many loving presents of things that I owned here? You are doing me very wrong. Have I not sent you a large amount of gold and silver to Cajamarca? And have you not taken from my brother Atahualpa that which rightfully had been passed down to me by my ancestors? Have I not given you everything in this city that you desired, the sum of which equals a huge amount, more than 6 million? The Spaniards, as though they were blinded by their evil greed, replied, "Whatever, Sapai Inca, don't waste your breath making excuses, for we have proof that you are intending to start an uprising in the entire land. Listen, men, bring some shackles."